And may God continue to bless this great nation, the greatest nation on earth, America. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from Indiana. Thank you for sharing the story of heroism. So often we don't get to hear about our heroes today. They go unnoticed. What you just spoke on reminds me of a gentleman named Mike Spann. Very few people know who Mike Spann is. Mike Spann was a Marine, and he joined the CIA. And after 9/11, 2001, he was the first American killed in Afghanistan. What's even more impressive about Mike Spann is what he wrote on his CIA application. He said, "I believe in the meaning of honesty and integrity. I'm an action person who feels personally responsible for making changes in this world that are within my power, because if I don't, no one else will." And these are the type of people that we're here to honor tonight. Next, it's my privilege to yield to a gentleman from Utah, Chris Stewart, Air Force pilot for 14 years, flying both rescue helicopters and B-1 bomber. He holds 3 world speed records, including the world's record for the fastest non-stop flight around the world. Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Wenstrup, for organizing this special order honoring our country's heroes. And it's a privilege for me to be with you tonight. Thank you. As you mentioned, I come from a family with deep roots in the military. I was a pilot for 14 years. My father was a pilot in World War II. 4 of my 5 brothers have served in the military. And I got to tell you, my time flying in the military was in many ways, the happiest years of my life. I remember I'd be up flying and I'd think, I can't believe that they pay me to do this. I would do this for free if I could. In addition to my family members, 3 of my congressional staff are veterans. I know firsthand some of the sacrifice that comes with service. The time away from family, the personal discomforts, the danger, being put in harm's way for many of our soldiers, all to protect our nation and to protect the freedoms of others. There have been great sacrifices in the past. Some of those we've heard about tonight, I suspect we'll probably hear about some others. I'd like to mention one man from my hometown of Farmington, Utah. I think he's a great example of sacrifice and courage. His name is Lieutenant Colonel Jay Hess. He spent 5.5 years as a prisoner of war in the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. During this time, you can imagine what he endured. Starvation, beatings, isolation, deprivations which it's very difficult, probably impossible for us to appreciate. After 2.5 years, he was finally given a letter from his family. And as he read this letter, he found himself smiling, and after a while it hurt because those smile muscles had not been exercised in 2.5 years, and he'd lost that ability to smile. It was a joyous day when he was returned to his family, his wife and 5 children. Yet despite all of this hardship, he looks back on his life and his experience with great humility and appreciation. He said, "How could I be so lucky, so fortunate? It is a good life." This man was a true American hero. But heroism continues today. This fall I had the opportunity to honor 4 Army soldiers. 2 of them, Sergeant Darrell Williams and Sergeant John Russell, who were jogging here on the National Mall one morning. When they heard a collision, they looked over and saw that a civilian had been hit by a bus. They didn't hesitate. They knew immediately what to do. They ran over, and using their shirts, they provided a tourniquet, and they saved this man's life. Now that may seem like a small thing, but it's a great example, once again, of the caliber of men and women that we find serving in our United States military. As Veterans Day approaches, I find myself humbled to share this background and experience with such people. I've always said that the military is the greatest incubator for leadership that there is anywhere in the world, and we see that demonstrated again and again. And finally, let me end with this. The United States of America is a special place. Now, I recognize that most nations feel that way. Everyone's proud of the land from which they come. I think God intended that they should feel that way. That's a good thing. But even though that's true, there's something special about this place. There's something truly unique about the United States. And there is no better example of that than the young men and young women that serve in our United States military. We don't fight to conquer a people. We fight to keep a people free. We don't fight to capture a land. We fight to set a land free. And the only thing we have ever asked is, as Colin Powell once said, a small piece of pasture where we could bury our soldier dead. If you've ever been to a military cemetery, and they are spread all over the world, from France and England and the Netherlands to Panama to the Philippines to Japan, if you have walked among those stone-cold graves, you know that this is sacred land. A poet once wrote about these soldiers, "Here dead we lie because we did not choose to live, and shame that land from which we had sprung. Life, to be sure, is nothing much to give, but young men think it is, and we were all young. I, like millions of other Americans, will always be grateful for their sacrifice. I honor them, and once again, I'm grateful to be among them." And with that, Mr. Wenstrup, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I thank the gentleman from Utah for his profound words and for sharing such a nice tribute. Next, I would like to yield to the gentleman from Nevada, Dr. Joe Heck. Dr. Heck is a colonel in the United States Army Reserve and commands a medical readiness support group. He was recently selected for general, and he continues to serve. Over time, he's served us in Operation Joint Endeavor, Operation Noble Eagle, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. I yield to the gentleman from Nevada.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my brother in uniform, the gentleman from Ohio, for organizing this very important special order to pay tribute to some very special people, America's veterans, America's heroes. I want to tell a story that I think epitomizes the very sacrifice and dedication that our men and women in uniform have to this nation. The date was February 21st, 2008. The place was Al-Assad, Anbar Province, Iraq. I was assigned as the Chief of Emergency Services and Aeromedical Evacuation at a Combat Support Hospital. Combat Support Hospital is similar to any inner-city emergency department, with periods of hustle and bustle, kind of routine stuff, punctuated by moments of controlled chaos and sheer terror. Such was that day on February 21st. We were taking care of routine cases in the emergency services section when the radio crackled and we received a call from an incoming helicopter saying that they were bringing in a young Marine who had been shot in the chest. So, of course, we quickly focused on the task that would soon be at hand. As the chief, I was making assignments, making sure all our equipment was ready. We were ready to receive this casualty and make sure that we could return him home. A couple of minutes later, the radio crackles again, and it's the helicopter calling in to tell us that the casualty was now unresponsive and that they've lost his pulse. A quiet fell over the resuscitation area. Everybody was singularly focused on what we were going to do for this young Marine when he arrived. Helicopter lands, we offload him, get him into the resuscitation suite, and we start doing what medical folks do. Ripping off clothing, starting IVs, doing an assessment. It winds up that he received a single gunshot wound to the chest, just mere millimeters to the side of his trauma plate protecting his center of mass. His eyes stared up at me lifeless as I was at the head of the bed. He was unresponsive. We quickly tried everything that we could do to bring this young man back, worked for over half an hour doing things that in a civilian emergency department would be considered heroic. But we were going to do everything we possibly could. Alas, we were not successful. That young man was Lance Corporal Drew Weaver of St. Charles, Missouri, and he was 20 years old. He sacrificed and gave his last full measure of devotion to this country. What happened next was even additionally awe-inspiring. My charge nurse, Lieutenant Colonel, now retired Maria Tackett, came into the room with a bucket of sudsy water and gingerly, carefully started to wash down Lance Corporal Weaver, wiping the dirt from his brow and his face, wiping off the now dried blood from his body. Just like a caring mother, she took care of this young 20-year-old Marine. Just when I thought I couldn't see any other acts of compassion greater than that, two of my medics, young enlisted folks, came in with an American flag. I have no idea where they got it from. They might have taken it off the flagpole in front of the hospital. But they carefully draped the flag over Lance Corporal Weaver. And then they both took up a position of parade rest at the foot of the bed. And while we were waiting for mortuary affairs to come and retrieve Lance Corporal Weaver, they stood there. And they stood there. And they stood there. I went in and said, you know, guys, you need a break? You know, take a break, sit down. And their response to me was, sir, never leave a fallen comrade. And there they stood until mortuary affairs came to retrieve that young Marine. Such is the story of those who sacrifice and of those who are dedicated to those who wear the uniform. I remember their names. I remember their faces to this day. I remember that day and the actions that those heroic men and women took, from Lance Corporal Weaver to the helicopter pilot, to the medics in the back of that helicopter, to my team, and everything we tried to do. That is why we gather here tonight to pay tribute to these very special men and women. May God bless our veterans, their families, their survivors, and may He continue to bless the greatest nation on His earth, the United States of America. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Heck. Colonel Heck, thank you for sharing that story. As a surgeon who served in Iraq, that was very moving to me and very familiar. And I think about how my experience in war has changed the national anthem for me. When I hear bombs bursting in air, you know, rockets, red glare, bombs bursting in air, I think of those that we didn't save. But when I think of home of the brave, land of the free, I think of those that have saved us time and time again throughout our history. At this time, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bentivolio. He's retired as a Sergeant First Class in the Army National Guard, had service in Iraq in 2007, and served in Vietnam as an infantry rifleman from 70 to 71. I yield to the gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Ohio and Brother-in-Arms for the opportunity to speak today. Mr. Speaker, my grandfather served in World War I, and my father and uncles served in the 1940s. The gentleman who lived in the house across the street from where I grew up was a former sailor in World War II. His aircraft carrier was hit by a kamikaze. Down the street a few houses was someone who fought in the Korean War. His daughter, Cookie, gave me my first kiss. Near him lived another veteran who served on a destroyer in the Navy, and there were two men across the street from him who served together in General Patton's Third Army as part of the force that relieved the 101st Airborne at Bastogne. I can still see their faces. Their examples of service played a crucial role in why I served in the armed services. Our next-door neighbor was Charles Parker, Sr. As a Marine in World War II, he received the Purple Heart on Iwo Jima. His son, Charles, Jr., was my best friend. And when I think of Chuck, I still smile. He was a guy who stood up for the little guy. I remember one time when this big bully picked on this little kid and a fight started. Chuck rushed into action and broke up the fight. He defended the weak. Doing the right thing matters. Charles Parker's name is inscribed on the Vietnam Wall Memorial, Panel 40 West, line 25. He died in service to his country on October 23, 1968. doing the right thing matters. But I think my understanding of service can be best summed up in the message of the movie Saving Private Ryan. Perhaps you've seen it. If you haven't, let me tell you what it's about. The movie begins with an elderly man walking through the cemetery off the beach at Normandy. His family is quietly following behind him. The scene then shifts to a landing craft heading for the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. Tom Hanks plays the part of Captain Miller, 2nd Rangers. As the landing craft hits the beach, the soldiers quickly experience the horrors of battle. Many of his comrades are killed and wounded in the scenes that follow. But after securing the beachhead, Captain Miller receives new orders. His new mission is to locate and bring home Private Ryan, played by Matt Damon, who's in the 101st Airborne, and Ryan's 3 brothers were recently killed within weeks of each other, and the Army thinks that no family should lose 4 sons to war. With a small contingent of soldiers under his command, Captain Miller sets off to locate Ryan. Over the course of a few days, Miller's groups take several losses. Eventually, they find him in a small village in France, but alas, he decides to stay and fight alongside his brothers in arms as they defend the small bridge in the village. During the battle, most of Miller's soldiers are killed. Only 2 remain. Captain Miller receives a mortal wound and sits gasping, his back against a motorcycle. He looks up at young Private Ryan and says, with his last breaths, "Earn this. Earn this." The scene changes to a close-up of Matt Damon. His face changes from young Ryan to the older man we met at the beginning of the movie. He's overlooking a gravestone that reads, Captain Miller, 2nd Rangers. Old Ryan falls to his knees in front of the gravestone and says, "Not a day goes by that I don't remember what you all did for me. I tried to live my life the best that I could. I hope that was enough. I hope that, at least in your eyes, I've earned what all of you have done for me." Let me tell you something. Not a day goes by that I don't remember what the fathers of my childhood friends and playmates did for us to protect the American dream, and my good friend Charles Parker. No matter where your family hails from, no matter what your background is, as citizens of this great nation, we must never let it be said that we've forgotten what our forefathers did for us. To my fellow veterans of the 182nd Field Artillery of the Michigan Army National Guard, and to all the veterans, past and present, thank you for your service. May God always bless America, and may we continue to be the home of the free because of the brave. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman from Michigan for his words. Mr. Bentivolio, thank you. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about James McNaughton, Staff Sergeant James McNaughton, Army Reservist, an MP, New York City policeman. We served on the same base in Iraq, and one day he and 2 other sergeants were being tasked with a mission that was going to be dangerous, and one of them had to go. James McNaughton volunteered over the other 2. He did that because the other 2 had children. And on that mission, Staff Sergeant James McNaughton was killed by a sniper. And today, there are 2 families that have their father because of James McNaughton. This is the type of selfless service that we see from our troops day in and day out. I had the opportunity to tell that story on TV one time, national cable TV. A couple days later, I got a call from James McNaughton's father, who said they were so shocked to hear their son's name and so honored that he was remembered in that way. We need to honor and remember all of our veterans, especially those that have made the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of us. At this time, I'm pleased to yield to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rodney Davis. Mr. Davis is not a veteran, but he's a supporter of veterans. And he'll be speaking on behalf of one of his staff members. And outside of his office, he has a sign that says, "I hire veterans." I yield to you, Mr. Davis.
Well, thank you to my colleague from the great state of Ohio. I'm humbled to be here as a non-veteran, somebody who has not served our country and our military, but is so proud of those of you who have. And I'm just honored to be able to be a part of the special order that you've arranged. Brad, this is, Mr. Speaker, this is an opportunity that many in this country will take for granted as they're watching this tonight and not know that it's because of the sacrifices of those like my colleague, Brad Wenstrup, who have served their country so well, that give us the freedoms today to stand on this floor and debate the issues that will impact this country for generations to come. And I'd like to stand here as somebody who hasn't served to thank all of my colleagues who have come to this floor to honor those who have served with them, those who have served our country and have had the opportunity to come home, and as we've heard tonight, those who have served our country and paid the ultimate sacrifice. So I'd like to personally thank my colleague Tim Griffin from Arkansas for his service, not only as a member of our military, but as a member of this Congress. I'd like to thank my colleague Todd Young from Indiana for his service in the military and also for his service in this body. I'd like to thank my colleague Joe Heck, Dr. Joe Heck, for his service for our nation, not only in our nation's military, but also in this body. I'd like to thank Chris Stewart, my good friend and colleague from Utah, for his service for this country in our military, and again, for his service today as a member of Congress. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank one who has yet to rise, Mr. Doug Collins, for his service to our country as a member of our military in protecting our freedoms, and also for his service to the citizens of Georgia. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank you for your service in our nation's military and for the service that you provide today for the great citizens in the great state of Michigan. Thank you on behalf of those of us who have not had the opportunity to serve. I want to say thank you for giving us this great nation that we now have the opportunity to serve in this body. Now, Mr. Speaker, I again am humbled to rise today to talk about our veterans and the sacrifices they've made to ensure the freedom of every single American. And I want to specifically mention a couple of folks. One is a good friend of mine who served our country in Vietnam, who came back injured and served my state, my great state of Illinois, as a member of the Illinois General Assembly. He still serves the citizens of Illinois today as somebody who is a pharmacist, works in the private sector. But my friend, Representative Ron Stevens from Greenville, Illinois, now spends his time, his spare time, raising money to help our wounded warriors. He walked miles upon miles over the last 2 years to raise thousands of dollars to help those who made it back home but paid a price. Representative Ron Stevens, thank you for your service in Vietnam. Thank you for your service to the great state of Illinois. And thank you, sir, my good friend, for serving this country, for our heroes who walk the streets with us today. And one of those heroes, as my colleague from Ohio mentioned, is someone who's not only a good friend of mine, but he works for me in my office in Champaign, Illinois. His name is Garrett Anderson. Garrett was on patrol in Iraq, ran over an IED. Garrett sacrificed his right arm. He sacrificed time away from his family, and he sacrificed the road to recovery for the freedoms that we enjoy and take for granted every day. Garrett now works with the veterans who are trying to access the benefits that they were promised. And Garrett was out here with me a few weeks ago, as we stood here and did an unprecedented bipartisan special order that honored all 79 living Congressional Medal of Honor recipients. And we stood here with my colleague Tulsi Gabbard, who's also served her country and continues to serve our country today in this body. We stood there side by side making sure that we honored every single recipient. These are our heroes, and I was humbled to see men and women from both parties come here to honor those who have served our country and showed acts of heroism. But since that time, Mr. Speaker, we had someone else awarded, given the Congressional Medal of Honor. And I'd like to stand here today because he didn't have the opportunity to have his story told until now. And I'd like to honor today the heroic efforts of the newest Medal of Honor recipient, Captain William D. Swenson of the United States Army. Captain Swenson would have made the 80th living Medal of Honor recipient. However, Sergeant Nicholas Orozco passed away on October 4th, leaving the number of Medal of Honor recipients at 79 still. My thoughts and prayers are with Sergeant Orozco's family and friends. Captain Swenson, though, was awarded the Medal of Honor for extreme bravery at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty in the Kunar province in Afghanistan on September 8, 2009. Captain Swenson's combat team was ambushed as it moved into the village of Ganjigal for a meeting with village elders. The enemy began unleashing a barrage of fire onto the team. Captain Swenson immediately returned fire and directed his Afghan border police while simultaneously calling in suppressive fire. Surrounded on three sides by enemy forces, Captain Swenson coordinated air assets and medical evacuation helicopter support to allow for the evacuation of the wounded. He ignored enemy radio transmissions demanding surrender and maneuvered uncovered to render medical aid to a wounded fellow soldier and moved him for air evacuation. With complete disregard for his own safety, Captain Swenson unhesitatingly led a team in an unarmored vehicle, exposing himself to enemy fire to recover the wounded. Captain Swenson's team returned to the battlefield amidst enemy fire again to recover 3 fallen Marines and 1 fallen Navy corpsman. His exceptional leadership and gallantry during 6 hours of continuous fighting rallied his teammates and effectively disrupted the enemy's assault. It is for his unwavering courage and heroism that I am proud to honor the actions today of Captain William D. Swenson. And I would be remiss, Mr. Speaker, if I did not mention the role that one of our other colleagues and veterans and heroes who have served this great country in the military and who serve this country now in this body, my colleague Duncan Hunter, who played a role in making sure that Captain Swenson was awarded this great honor as the now 79th living recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor. Thank you again, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Wenstrup, for what you've done for veterans tonight and what you continue to do every single day that you're here. May God bless you. May God bless all those who you have honored this evening. And may God continue to bless the United States of America. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Illinois for that fine tribute, Mr. Davis. I'd like to share a story about Major John Pryor. John Pryor, M.D., trauma surgeon from Philadelphia. He joined the Army Reserve in 2004, but on September 11, 2001, seeing that his nation was under attack, he got in his car and he drove to Ground Zero, hitchhiked all the way in after he drove as far as he could. And after that, he took care of people. And after that, he started thinking that there's more that he could do for his country. He joined the Army Reserve. We served together in Iraq, became good friends. And after returning, we did a trauma conference together in Cincinnati. John returned to Iraq in 2008. And on Christmas Day, after attending Mass. He walked out and he was hit by a mortar and killed. John was the type of person that did all for others. He left behind, unfortunately, a wife, 3 children. Above his desk, he had a quote by Albert Schweitzer that said, "Seek always to do something good somewhere. Every man has to seek in his own way to realize his true worth. You must give some time to your fellow man. Even if it's a little thing, do something for those who need help, something for which you get no pay but the privilege of doing it. For remember, you don't live in a world all your own. Your brothers are here too." It's now my privilege to yield to the gentleman from Georgia, Doug Collins. Mr. Doug Collins. He serves as the Air Force Reserve Chaplain with the 94th Airlift Wing. Doug has ministered to members of our military as a chaplain in the Air Force Reserve since 2002. He served a combat tour stationed at Balad Air Force Base in Iraq in 2008. I yield to the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you. Brad, I appreciate that, Mr. Speaker. It is just an honor to be here tonight. For in 2 weeks, Americans across this great nation will pause to remember, to honor, and to commemorate the men and women who have served the cause of liberty while wearing the uniform. Veterans Day origins come from the battlefields of Europe, when on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns of World War I fell silent. Of all of our nation's holidays, Veterans Day holds a special meaning for me and my family. This day affords a unique opportunity to reflect and to remember people I have served alongside in the uniform and and out. It also reminds me tonight of not only those that I served in uniform with, but I continued to serve with, who are actually members of my staff. I serve with 2, one who is with me tonight in the gallery, retired Master Sergeant Bill Coakley, and also Vernon Robinson, Major, United States Army, who serves in my D.C. office as well. It's just a reminder of the continuity of those who serve in the areas in which they serve as we go forward each and every day in our daily walk. As a chaplain serving at Balad Air Base in Iraq, I was privileged to know and to comfort those who bore the wounds of battle. I watched in awe at the absolute determination and phenomenal dedication of doctors, nurses, and medical technicians as they fought back against death itself to save the lives of our military warriors. And because of their skills, more than 98% of those arriving at Balad alive left Balad alive. That's an amazing statistic and a compliment to you, Congressman, and others like you. And seeing the others that night on the flight line, both Army and Air Force, Marine, Navy, and even Coast Guard in the middle of the desert. I also think of the young airman I met one night while he was on guard duty, and he didn't come to the gate when I first drove up. And I sat there for a second in the truck, and he didn't come out. He finally come out, and he come rumbling out of the back, and he said, "Oh, chap, I'm sorry, I didn't see you sitting there. And you didn't see, I apologize." And I looked at him, I said, "Okay, it's just me, but if the colonel had come along, there might have been a different issue. What were you doing?" I was going to try and help him. And I was ready for some excuse that he was tired or whatever, and he got out a little piece of paper, and he had written down. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I was figuring up my salary." He said, "Because now I've got a little bit of money, and last year wasn't real good at home. Mom was sick, and Dad got laid off," and he said, "We didn't have a lot of Christmas." He said, "But this year," he said, "I'm making big money." He's an A1C. Big money. And he said, "I want to make sure that I'll be able to send stuff home so my brother and my sister can have Christmas." That is what I met that night. I'm reminded when I came home, I carry with me in my basement, and it's a reminder because one day I picked up the Stars and Stripes. You know, in a war zone, you pick up anything to read, and I would pick up the Stars and Stripes, pick up everything. And one of those papers I happened to just be reading while I was eating, and I opened it up, and in the Stars and Stripes, they carry pictures of those who did not make it. They died in combat. And I remember opening that page up, and I looked, and along the bottom there were 8 pictures. And I remember distinctly 4 of them because I stood beside their bed and held their hand in Balad. I carry that picture and that flag, and as Congressman Winstrup said, the national anthem no longer, if it ever was, just a song, It's a spirit that lives. The 9th District of Georgia has a great legacy of citizens who have proudly served in our armed forces. This spring, we lost one of our greatest veterans, Colonel Benjamin Purcell, United States Army. Colonel Purcell was the highest-ranking Army officer held as prisoner of war. Colonel Purcell was commissioned a lieutenant through the Army Reserve Training Office at North Georgia College, my alma mater, and was stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia, and was subsequently sent to Europe. And in August 1967, a year after I was born, he was stationed to Vietnam. Colonel Purcell became a POW after his helicopter was shut down in Quang Tri City, Vietnam, in 1968. Most of his time as a POW was spent in solitary confinement. He was unable to be with other prisoners until shortly before he was released. And on March 27, 1973, Colonel Purcell was freed as the U.S. was finally pulling out of Vietnam. During his military career, Colonel Purcell was awarded the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart, along with the parachutist and combat infantry badges. Colonel Purcell was laid to rest with full military honors. Colonel Purcell's courageous story is just one of the many we remember on Veterans Day. He will always have the thanks and admiration of many Georgians. And on this Veterans Day, I will think about a young Marine from my hometown of Gainesville. In 2011, Corporal Sean Adams was on patrol in Afghanistan when he stepped on an improvised explosive device. The IED left him without legs, his left thumb, and his right pinky finger. And he told me that when he went to Afghanistan, I fought for myself, my family, my country, the Corps, and now I'm fighting for my life. Sean is being medically retired from his beloved Marine Corps and is even now searching for the opportunity to continue to serve his community. He is now fitted with prosthetic legs. His stated goal is to run the Marine Corps Marathon next year. And having seen this young man's courage and strength, I'm certain he will make it. Later this week, I have the privilege of attending a retirement ceremony at Dobbins Air Force Reserve Base for Colonel Timothy Tarchik, who has honorably served our nation for his entire adult life, and I am humbled to call him a mentor, and most importantly, a friend. These are just a few of the veterans who have touched my life, and I often think back to the men and women of our armed forces with whom I've had the pleasure of serving our nation, and I think of the conversations, the laughter, and also the tears that we have shed. It is often the very short or one-time interactions with comrades in arms that leave the most indelible memories. And on my desk, if you were to come to my office, if you can find it on the 5th floor of Cannon, you will see on my desk a little bracelet that was made for me by a young lady in Balad who was struggling every day. And I'd go by and see her, and I'd take her stuff, and I'd give her some encouragement, or give her a Coke, or give her a candy. When one night I came by and she handed it to me and she said, "Chap, you're always giving me something. I want to give you something." And she gave me this parachute bracelet, which sits on my desk right now. So I don't care what goes on the floor of this house, in the big sense, because all I have to do is remember that bracelet on my desk and remember why we are here and what that flag means. This Veterans Day, let us commit ourselves to express our gratitude to America's veterans by remembering their service and sacrifice, and of course thanking each of our veterans in our own lives, in our own way. And before I yield back, I want it to be known the one who put this together, who has become a valued part of my life in the time that we have served together. Lieutenant Colonel Brad Winstrup serves in the United States Army Reserve since 1998. In 2005 and 2006, he served a tour in Iraq as a combat surgeon and was awarded the Bronze Star and the Combat Action Badge for his service. During his time in Congress, Brad is fulfilling his reserve duty by treating patients at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda. But I commit to you, Mr. Speaker, he's serving every day on a place called Capitol Hill with the gifts that he has been entrusted to by his Creator, and also soon to be a dad who will pass along this legacy of service to his child. And with that, I yield back to you, sir.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia and my dear friend, Chaplain Doug Collins. Thank you for those kind words. You know, we're honored to serve here with so many that have served, not all of them here tonight, on both sides of the aisle. I think of my colleague Tammy Duckworth, who suffered severe injuries in Iraq, has bilateral leg prostheses. She had the courage to serve again and to continue to serve, not only in the Guard, but here as a congresswoman from Illinois. And it is an honor to serve with her here on Capitol Hill. You know, Teddy Roosevelt said it so well when he said, "It's not the critic who counts, nor the man who points out how the strong man stumbled or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who's in the arena, whose face is marred by the dust and sweat and blood." Our veterans serve, they fight in wars they didn't start. And those who serve in war are probably the greatest lovers of peace, the ones who appreciate it the most. Our great American veterans, they may be best described in this way. They are what others care not to be. They go where others fear to go. And they do what others fail to do. And they ask nothing from those that gave nothing. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to honor those that felt that they should give of themselves for something greater than themselves. You know, when I was a child, when we'd go to bed at night, we'd kiss our parents goodnight and go to bed. My father would come in one more time, and he would take his thumb and he'd make the sign of the cross on our forehead. When you tuck your children in at night, when you go to bed, and you close your eyes, and you feel safe and secure and unafraid, remember why. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight we will be talking about a very important accomplishment that this body, the House of Representatives, can make on a bipartisan basis for our country, and that is immigration reform. By refusing to act on comprehensive immigration reform, there is great cost to the American people in jobs, the undermining of the rule of law, and destruction of the opportunities that will arise by tackling this head-on. The longer we delay passing comprehensive immigration reform, the greater the cost of inaction in both economic, human, and security terms. Every week that Congress is in session for the rest of the year, I'll be here on the floor talking about the cost of inaction on immigration reform. And this, while there's a clear path forward. There's a comprehensive immigration reform bill, a compromise. Took a little give and take from both sides, a compromise supported by the business community and labor, by the faith community, by the law enforcement community, by farmers and by farm workers that has passed the United States Senate with more than a two-thirds majority. We've introduced a similar bill, H.R. 15, here in the House with a growing number of bipartisan co-sponsors, and are encouraging the Speaker and the Majority Leader to bring this bill to a vote where we have confidence that it will pass. Our economy will suffer tremendously if we fail to pass comprehensive immigration reform. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, immigration reform helps grow the economy, creating between 500,000 and 1 million jobs, reduces the deficit by over $200 billion, bolsters job creation, and strengthens the viability of Social Security and Medicare. What's not to like? Let's restore the rule of law to our country. Let's improve our security. And let's unite families. In human terms, the cost of inaction is inflicting a heavy toll. Over 135,000 deportations have taken place since the Senate passed immigration reform last June, including thousands of people who are non-criminals who would have benefited from immigration reform and instead became a cost to U.S. taxpayers to the tune of more than $10,000 each to deport. Take a few examples from my district of people that immigration reform will help today. Diana and Kathia are two young women from Larimer County in my district. They're high school students who were brought here from Mexico as young children by their parents. They're excellent students, both straight A students, They want to go to college. Kathia wants to go to medical school, and Diana wants to study cinematography. Both of these young women are applicants to the President's Deferred Action DACA program, and we hope that they receive their DACA permit soon. But that's only a temporary fix for a limited period of time. They're both ambitious, capable young women who want to give back to our country and make it stronger, if only we will let them. It's time to find a way for Kathy and Diana and the so many like them to pursue their dreams, contribute to our communities without having to live in constant fear because of lack of status. Another woman in my district who feels the pain of our current broken immigration system is Norma. Norma came to the U.S. over a decade ago, like so many of our ancestors, including my great-grandparents, in search of a better life. She's the mother and primary caretaker of twin boys who are U.S. citizens. Both of her children suffer from medical conditions, and she works incredibly hard to ensure that her kids have access to what they need. She's a hardworking, honest person, a leader in her community, doesn't have any criminal history or pose any kind of threat to national security. All she wants to do is give back to our country, to pay taxes and contribute like every other American. But nevertheless, Norma was placed in deportation proceedings last year following a traffic stop. If we don't reform our broken immigration system today, how many more families will be torn apart? People like Hathia, Diana, and Norma feel the negative impact of this House of Representatives' failure to act on the Senate immigration reform bill every single day. There's no excuse for inaction. We need to finalize and pass immigration reform this year. I'll be talking more about the cost of inaction in a few moments, but I want to yield to my good friend and colleague from Florida, the sponsor of H.R. 15, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. Mr. Speaker, I have the distinct privilege of representing a district that has been, in the last several decades, been in large part built by immigrants. I lived in South Florida during some very tough times for the immigrant community. I remember as a young man seeing bumper stickers on the backs of cars that said, "Would the last American please bring the flag?" But you know what? The flag still flies high in Miami. It's a thriving, growing economy and a beacon of work and opportunity for millions. People from all over are drawn to my community because they believe in the American dream. My constituents know that immigrants only add to the American way of life. They make our country better. They create more opportunity for all. A vast majority of Americans recognize this. Some polls show that 80 to 70% of Americans support comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. Fixing our broken immigration system isn't something that we can take on a step-by-step basis, only addressing parts of the problem. I was proud to introduce comprehensive immigration bill with my colleagues Gerald Polis and several others, in a bill that secures our borders, builds our economy, provides a way forward for millions of undocumented individuals living in the United States. With every day that passes, millions continue to live in the shadows and jobs continue slipping away overseas. This is an issue that is about justice, it's about fairness. It's about ensuring also America's economic prosperity. In Florida alone, legalizing all of the currently undocumented immigrants would generate $1.3 billion in additional tax revenues and create 97,000 new jobs. Fixing our broken immigration system will help small businesses expand, foster innovation, increase productivity, raise wages, and help create thousands of jobs. And the fight for comprehensive immigration reform is one that makes all Americans better, makes our country richer, and creates opportunity for all. In the history of the world, there has never been a great nation that was shedding citizens. In fact, great nations welcome opportunities. The last few weeks have not cast a positive light on the House of Representatives. But this is an issue where we can repair that broken image. It is possible to find a bipartisan compromise that's the right thing for our nation to do. And the costs of inaction are simply too high. More than enough members of this chamber understand the benefits of immigration, understand that it is a necessity for our country's prosperity, and understand that is what we will do inevitably. Let's do it now. Let's do it right. Let's get it done. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield back to the gentleman from Colorado and thank him for this.
I thank the gentleman from Miami, a leader on the effort to reform our broken immigration system. We have here another great leader in the debate on reforming and replacing our broken immigration system with one that works, my colleague from the state of California, Mr. Takano. How do we set that up? While Mr. Takano is getting ready, reclaiming my time, I want to talk about the overwhelming public support for immigration reform. More than 70% of the American people support immigration reform, including majorities of Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. The American people know that what we're doing now isn't working, and by failing to act and only continuing to perpetuate the undermining of the rule of law, a population of over 10 million people that are here illegally, and a system that is out of whack with reality, it will only continue to hurt the American people. With that, I'll be happy to yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano.
I thank the gentleman from Colorado for yielding time. Reforming our immigration system is one of the top issues in our nation, and I was happy to see the Senate act this past June when it passed a comprehensive immigration bill with an overwhelming bipartisan vote. The Senate bill solves many of the problems with our current immigration system. It creates a pathway to citizenship, secures our borders, addresses the current backlog, and helps the dreamers who were brought here through no fault of their own. Unfortunately, the push for immigration reform hit a brick wall when the legislation moved over to the House and Speaker Boehner flatly refused to bring it up for a vote. Sadly, this is not the first time Speaker Boehner and his irresponsible faction of the House Republican caucus has stood in the way of what's best for the American people, even though there is a clear governing majority that is ready to act. And despite Speaker Boehner's desperate attempt to follow the so-called rule, which requires him only to allow votes on bills supported by a majority of House Republicans, the governing majority has been able to pass several pieces of substantive legislation this year. Just who is this governing majority? It's made up of nearly the entire Democratic caucus and a handful of moderate, sensible Republicans. In January of this year, a governing majority of 172 Democrats and 85 Republicans came together to avoid the fiscal cliff, saving our economy from ruin. Several weeks later, when a majority of the Republican caucus stood opposed to relief for the victims of Superstorm Sandy, it took an overwhelming support from Democrats and a small group of Republicans to help those in need. Shortly thereafter, the House passed the Senate's version of the Violence Against Women Act, providing protections for victims of domestic violence with unanimous Democratic support and a portion of the Republican caucus. Then in March, facing the deadline of a government shutdown, a temporary budget extension to keep the government funded until September 30th also needed the support of Democrats to pass the House. And finally, despite claims indicating that the votes weren't there to pass a clean CR, the House reopened the government and avoided default with the unanimous support of Democrats and a group of Republicans. The reality is, to pass anything with substance, Speaker Boehner needs to stand up to the extreme faction of his party, stop blocking important legislation, and get out of the way and let the House of Representatives work its will. America needs Democrats and Republicans to come together. We have seen what can be accomplished when we are united. And who are we kidding about the Hastert Rule? The Speaker has already violated it multiple times this year. In the lead-up to the most recent crisis, he said that he didn't want the government to shut down or default on its debts. If Speaker Boehner truly meant that, he would have turned to the governing majority, and we would have avoided a 16-day shutdown that cost our country $24 billion in economic activity. The governing majority has done its job with the fiscal cliff, with aid to Superstorm Sandy, and with the Violence Against Women Act, and with the recent government shutdown and debt ceiling negotiations. We've escaped manufactured crisis after manufactured crisis, and I know that the American people are eagerly waiting for the House of Representatives to pass meaningful legislation that addresses our challenges. The governing majority is ready to do its job once again with comprehensive immigration reform, as millions of Americans and aspiring Americans are waiting for this body to act. It's time to put aside the theatrical displays, Mr. Speaker. Let us govern so we can bring our brothers and sisters out of the shadows. I believe that if the Senate's comprehensive immigration reform bill came to the floor of the House, the governing majority would once again do what's right for the American people and pass this important legislation. Let's vote on the Senate's bill and fix our broken immigration system. The time is now. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from California, and I take the opportunity to sort of point out that as he talks about the governing majority, we're seeing a coalition already build around immigration reform. In a bill that was filed less than 3 weeks ago, we already have 187 co-sponsors, which puts us in a very good place to pass it if it's allowed to come to the floor. That means that already 95% of Democrats have signed on to the bill. That means that a Democratic Senate already passed out a bill, and that the President stands ready to sign a comprehensive immigration reform if it gets to his desk. So our hope is that in the days to come, in the 17 days left of working session before the end of the year, that we will have and find the will to bring something to the floor so that we can move this forward. With that, I yield to the gentleman from Colorado.
I thank the gentleman from Miami. I want to talk a little bit about support in Colorado. In Colorado, purple state, middle of the road. We have 4 Republicans, 3 Democrats in our congressional delegation. A state that's affected by immigration, a strong tradition of immigration in our district, a strong exchange of economic ties with our neighboring countries. Here's some recent polls on in a few of our congressional districts in our country. The 3rd congressional district, represented by my friend Congressman Scott Tipton, recent polls show that 77% of the people, this is the district including Pueblo and Grand Junction and Aspen, 77% of the people in the district support immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. Only 17% oppose. In the neighboring district of my good friend Cory Gardner, the 4th congressional district of Colorado, 76% support immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. In the district of my friend and colleague Mike Kaufman, Aurora, Colorado, and Douglas County, 74% support immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship, and failure to act and avoid this issue is, in fact, not delivering for the American people. One cannot speak out of both sides of their mouth forever and say that in some abstract sense we're for immigration reform, but not give this body the ability to pass immigration reform. The American people, Mr. Speaker, are smarter than that. It has been 123 days since the Senate has passed an immigration reform bill. And you know what? We have H.R. 15 in the House. We want that to come to the vote. But if there's other immigration reform packages, I know there's been a bipartisan group that's been meeting for a while. Recently, some of the members have pulled out. If there's other ideas, let's put them on the table. But inaction for 123 days is inexcusable. Inexcusable. The time for action is not now. It wasn't just yesterday. It was last year. It was 5 years ago. It was 10 years ago. We can't afford to continue to wait day after day, week after week, year after year without taking action. The American people, Mr. Speaker, have had enough and are demanding more of us. There's something that we know for sure. The enforcement-only approach has failed. It hasn't worked. The number of people here illegally has only increased. We've increased the budget of the Border Patrol by 10 times. And the number of unauthorized people here illegally increased by 3 times during that same period. So what does that mean? If we increase that budget 20 times, does that mean the number of people here illegally will quadruple? Maybe, but that's clearly not a solution. Just look at the data. And there's a human toll, Mr. Speaker. From 1998 to 2012, over 5,000 people died crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, just looking for a better life. Just as my ancestors did, Mr. Speaker, just as your ancestors did. From 1998 to 2007, over 100,000 parents of U.S. citizen children were removed from this country. Yes, little Johnny, little Sarah, coming home from school. They're American. They were born here. They'll vote someday. Coming home from school. Oh, sorry. Mom is in deportation proceedings. Your mom won't be here for you, little Johnny or little Sarah. What did she do? A taillight out on her car? 10 miles over the speeding limit? I got a speeding ticket last year, Mr. Speaker. I have a 2-year-old son, Mr. Speaker. To think that something like that could force me to be ripped from my family, not for months, not for years, forever. There's something called a lifetime bar, Mr. Speaker, forever being taken away from my family, Mr. Speaker. I would risk crossing that border and dying like 5,000 people did to be with my son, Mr. Speaker. And that's an American trait. That's what a good American would do. That's what a good American parent would do, Mr. Speaker. Let's let people give back to our country and provide for their families. That's an American value. And we can do that now. My colleague, Mr. Takano, talked about a governing majority. There's a governing majority for passing H.R. 15, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill, now. I can't tell you whether it's 25 Republicans or 45 Republicans or 80 Republicans, but they will join nearly every Democrat, if not every Democrat, in passing comprehensive immigration reform now. I'd like to yield to my colleague from Miami and ask him if he's ever seen this kind of coalition of business and labor and faith-based community and agriculture and farm workers, unlikely suspects, coming together around something that's such common sense. Have you seen this kind of unprecedented coalition and public support on any other issue, and what do you think it means for immigration reform?
Well, I'd like to thank the gentleman from Colorado, and I think he's absolutely right. This is an unprecedented partnership of business, labor, tech community, all coming together around the basic thing to help our country move forward.